The sea was never silent. Long before the British Empire ruled the waves, before Columbus crossed the Atlantic, a different kind of storm thundered from the north. Picture it: icy mist curling over black water, the distant thunder of drums, and longships slicing through waves like knives through silk. These were not just pirates or raiders. They were farmers, poets, and kings, driven by hunger, ambition, and something far more primal: the need to carve their name into the world. They called them the Vikings. For 2 centuries, their dragon-proud ships haunted the coasts of Europe, from the monasteries of Lindisfarne to the rivers of Russia. But behind the horned helmet myth lies a more fascinating truth: a civilization as complex as it was brutal. In today's journey, we'll sail through storm and saga, exploring who the Vikings truly were, how games like Age of Empires II and shows like Vikings shaped our image of them, and why their legacy still pulses through modern culture. This isn't just history. This is a reckoning with the myth and the men behind it.
The year was 793. The sea was calm, the monks were singing. For generations, the remote island of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England had been a beacon of faith, a holy place far from the wars and chaos of the world. The monastery was filled with books, gold chalices, relics of saints, and the soft murmur of prayer. It was a quiet corner of civilization, untouched by violence. Until one morning, the sea betrayed them. A strange beat, like thunder but too rhythmic, grew louder through the mist. Then, like ghosts tearing through fog, the longships appeared, sleek, deadly, carved with dragon heads that seemed to leer at the shore. Their white sails stretched like the wings of beasts, catching the wind as they closed in on paradise. They hit the beach like a wave of steel. Tall men with braided blonde hair and iron in their eyes leapt from the ships. Their weapons glinted with salt and blood. They didn't shout. They didn't chant. They just moved, fast, brutal, and without hesitation. Axes crushed bone. Swords split skin. Fire met parchment. Holy books, illuminated with gold leaf, were trampled into the mud. The monks screamed. Some tried to run. Others knelt, praying for mercy that would not come. The attackers tore through the sanctuary, not as conquerors, but as reapers. And in less than an hour, the holiest site in England was a ruin. Gold and silver were taken. Brothers in faith were butchered. The tide carried away not just bodies, but a message. The world has changed. The North has risen. The attack on Lindisfarne wasn't just a raid. It was the moment history cracked open. This was the beginning of the Viking Age, a new chapter written in blood and salt. Over the next 2 centuries, these seaborne raiders would redefine what it meant to wage war, to trade, to explore. They would become the monsters of Christian nightmares and the heroes of Nordic sagas. Their longships were their chariots, their gods, strange and hungry, their ambitions, boundless. They were the Vikings, and the world would never forget them. Fast forward 1,200 years. Most of us first met the Vikings not through history books, but on a screen. In Age of Empires II, they're a fierce civilization defined by longboats, fishing bonuses, and fearless infantry. Their Berserkers, mad warriors who regenerate health, are both mythical and terrifying. They dominate water maps. They rush early. They don't wait for peace. We play them not because they are noble, but because they are relentless. In many ways, it's accurate. But in many others, it's only the beginning. Today, Viking culture is everywhere, from tattoos to TV. In the series Vikings, we follow Ragnar Lothbrok, a charismatic farmer who becomes a godlike legend. We watch Lagertha, a shield maiden who shatters gender roles with every swing of her axe. In The Last Kingdom, we see a Saxon boy raised by Vikings, torn between faith and blood. These aren't just warriors. They're explorers, poets, lovers, and kings. And in their world, the line between myth and memory blurs with every saga sung around a fire. The Viking brand has become irresistible. It's rebellion wrapped in history. It's chaos with a purpose. It's the fantasy of pure freedom. But behind every myth lies a messier, more human truth. Here's the twist. What if those men who stormed Lindisfarne weren't just heartless barbarians? What if they were desperate? By the late 8th century, the Scandinavian world was facing a crisis. Limited farmland, population growth, internal power struggles. For many Norsemen, survival meant leaving home. Raiding was not just blood sport. It was a way to eat, to rise, to be remembered. And their longships? They were more than war machines. They were also vessels of migration, carrying not just warriors, but settlers, traders, and families. For every axe swung in England, a seed was planted in Iceland or Normandy. The same men who burned churches also built cities. The same hands that spilled blood also crafted jewelry, poetry, and laws. So who were the real Vikings? They were farmers, herders, blacksmiths, and seafarers. Their gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, demanded bravery but also wisdom. Their laws allowed women to divorce, to own land, to rule. Their stories were sung by skalds, not written down, but passed from mouth to mouth like sacred flame. They weren't a single people, but a network from Norway to Denmark to Sweden, each with their own customs, dialects, and dreams. And while raiding made them infamous, trade made them rich. From Baghdad to Byzantium, Viking merchants moved amber, fur, and slaves. Arabic coins have been found in Swedish burial mounds. Norse graffiti still marks the marble walls of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. Their reach was global, long before the term existed. In games like Age of Empires II, we command them like gods. We order berserkers into battle. We rule the seas with longboats. We tear through enemies with brute force. But the truth is, the Vikings were never just about brute force. They were thinkers, engineers, survivors. Their world was one of snow and shadow, of long winters and burning faith. They didn't conquer because they loved violence. They conquered because they refused to be forgotten. Closing, beyond blood and fire. Lindisfarne was just the beginning. The real Viking story is so much more. It's the tale of people who stepped off the edge of their known world into the unknown, who dared to challenge fate, who redefined what it meant to be powerful long before kings and popes could grasp it. So before we continue this journey through battles and empires, through legends and loot, let's remember one thing. The Vikings were never just warriors. They were a golden storm, and it's time we chased the lightning behind it. Longships slicing through the mist, oars beating like war drums, sails full of the northern wind. The dragon heads on their prows weren't just decoration, they were warnings. To coastal villages across Europe, the sight meant terror, fire, and death. These were the Vikings, or so the stories go. Raiders, savages, pirates of the north. But stop there. That's the image we've been sold. What if we told you that this is only half the truth? What if behind the axe-wielding warrior was a father, a farmer, a lawmaker, a man who worshipped the gods not for conquest, but for reign? To truly understand the Viking world, we must strip away the Hollywood smoke and step into the Longhouse, into the heart of a civilization far more complex than we've ever imagined. The first twist in this tale? The word Viking was never meant to describe a people. It was a job, a verb. To go a Viking meant to go on an expedition, usually violent, often profitable. It was something you did, not something you were. So while movies show everyone in Scandinavia sharpening axes, the reality is more grounded. Only a small portion of Norsemen ever went raiding. The rest stayed home, tilling the soil, mending nets, trading fur, or praying for a mild winter. They were husbands, wives, children, and they were survivors. Let's take you there. Imagine standing on a rocky bluff overlooking a fjord in western Norway. The land beneath your feet is hard, cracked, unforgiving. The wind howls even in summer. This was home, not the lush fields of England or the golden plains of Francia, but a stubborn land that gave nothing for free. To survive here, you needed grit. Most people were bondi, free farmers. They grew barley and rye in short, brutal summers. They herded sheep for wool, pigs for meat, and cattle for milk. A failed harvest could mean death. A harsh winter, starvation. Viking society wasn't built on conquest. It was born from necessity. So why go raiding? Because staying meant struggle. And the sea offered hope. Dangerous, yes, but full of promise. Forget the myth of lawless barbarians. Viking society was one of order, tradition, and surprisingly democratic principles. At the top were jarls, the powerful chiefs or petty kings who ruled small territories and led men into battle. Below them were carls, free citizens, farmers, shipbuilders, blacksmiths, merchants. And at the bottom were the thralls, enslaved people, often captured in raids or bought through trade. But here's the twist. Social mobility existed. A thrall could earn or buy their freedom. A carl could become wealthy enough to rise among the jarls. Unlike the rigid feudal hierarchies of Europe, the Viking world had space, albeit limited, for ambition. And decision-making? It wasn't a king's decree. It was debated at the Thing, a public assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, judge crimes, and pass laws. It was loud, chaotic, and deeply democratic. Even kings had to respect the Thing or risk rebellion. Forget castles and fortresses. The beating heart of every Viking community was the Longhouse. Picture a massive wooden hall, 40 feet, maybe more. Thick beams. A central hearth that never goes cold. Smoky air thick with the scent of stew and sweat. This was home. In these walls, families ate, worked, told stories, sang songs. It wasn't just shelter. It was the cradle of identity. Children learned the sagas of old. Women spun wool while men repaired tools. Here, generations huddled together, not just for warmth, but for meaning. Vikings didn't live isolated lives. They lived together, in hardship, in celebration, and in belief. To live in Viking lands was to live in a world of gods. There was Odin, the Allfather, god of war, wisdom, and poetry. A figure as mysterious as he was powerful. He gave up an eye for knowledge. He hung himself on the world tree to unlock the secrets of the runes. Not your typical deity. Then there was Thor, beloved protector of mankind. Red-bearded, hammer-wielding, the one who kept monsters at bay and storms at sea. And Freya, goddess of fertility, battle, and love. And Loki, the trickster whose schemes would one day bring about the end of the world. This wasn't mythology to them. This was reality. The gods were in the thunder and the fire, in the good harvest and the child's fever. Religion was woven into every act, every day. Blot, ritual sacrifices were made to appease the gods. Trees were sacred, so were stones, rivers, animals. The ultimate honor? dying well. Here's the part you know from movies, and yet it runs deeper than Hollywood ever dares to show. To die in battle bravely, sword in hand, was to be chosen by Valkyries. These warrior maidens would lift your soul to Valhalla, Odin's hall. There you'd feast, drink, and fight until Ragnarok, the final battle of the gods. But this wasn't a bloodthirsty fantasy. It was a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of a short, brutal life. To believe that death wasn't the end, that your name could live on in song and your soul would fight beside the gods. For a culture born in the shadow of ice and sea, that mattered. So yes, they raided. Yes, they burned and pillaged. But they also built some of the finest ships the world had ever seen. They traded as far east as Baghdad and as far west as Newfoundland. They carved delicate jewelry from amber and forged swords so advanced they mystified modern metallurgists. They told stories, epic sagas full of love, revenge, loyalty, and tragedy that still shape Scandinavian identity today. They were brutal, but also beautiful. They were destroyers, but also dreamers. The image of the Viking as a wild-haired berserker swinging an axe is cinematic. But the truth is far more human and far more fascinating. They were not one thing. They were many. Raiders and farmers, poets and killers, craftsmen and conquerors, believers in fate, yet shapers of their own legacy. And that is why, more than a millennium later, the Viking spirit still sails, etched not just into stone, but into story. Podester. It was a quiet June morning in 793 AD. The sea around Lindisfarne was still, the sky washed in pale northern light. Monks in brown robes chanted their morning prayers inside the monastery, an island sanctuary off the northeast coast of England. They had no swords, no soldiers, no warning. What came next would shake the Christian world to its core. From the horizon, dark shapes emerged, slender, fast-moving ships with curved dragon heads slicing through the waves. Within minutes, the monastery was engulfed in blood and fire. The monks were slaughtered or dragged away in chains. Holy relics were desecrated, gold was ripped from altars, and centuries of sacred peace were shattered. That was the beginning. Europe would never feel safe again. The attack on Lindisfarne wasn't the first time Scandinavian seafarers had reached foreign shores, but it was the first time they struck with such savage intent, and the first time their violence was documented and spread across Christian Europe. So why did they raid? It wasn't one simple reason, but a perfect storm of necessity, opportunity, and ambition. For generations, the Norse lived in isolated, rugged lands. Their coastlines were cold and jagged, their farmland limited. A young Carl, a freeman, might grow up on a small patch of rocky soil, knowing he'd never inherit more than his father's weather-beaten tools. The best-case scenario? A life of endless toil. The worst? Starvation. Add to that a growing population, interclan rivalries, and a culture that honored glory over comfort, and you had a pressure cooker. Now imagine hearing stories of soft, fertile lands to the south, of fat monasteries guarded by prayer instead of blades, places where gold glittered in the candlelight and kings grew soft on wine. To the Vikings, it was like dangling fresh meat in front of starving wolves. To the Norse, the Christian concept of sacred ground meant nothing. There was no divine protection in wood and stone. The gods of Asgard demanded action, not submission. If treasure lay behind a wooden door guarded only by monks, it wasn't a sin to take it. It was foolish not to. And so they came. Not as conquerors, not yet, but as raiders, armed with axes and a hunger for wealth and status. A successful raid meant more than gold. It meant songs sung in your name, land back home, respect in your clan, maybe even a seat at the chieftain's table. Raiding was a rite of passage, an economic necessity, and a cultural statement all in one. But wanting to raid and being able to raid were two different things. The real revolution, the Viking superweapon, was their longship. These were not clumsy cargo boats. They were engineering marvels, sleek, symmetrical, and terrifyingly fast. A longship could cross oceans and slide up rivers in a single journey. With shallow drafts, they needed almost no depth to float, meaning they could beach almost anywhere and strike inland with shocking speed. Powered by both sail and oars, longships moved with wind or muscle. Their symmetrical design meant they could reverse without turning around, a game changer for quick escapes. With these ships, the Vikings didn't need harbors, didn't need maps, didn't even need to stay. They would appear from nowhere, vanish into mist, and leave only burning homes and shattered lives behind. After Lindisfarne, the floodgates opened. More raids followed, each more daring than the last. English coastal towns were looted. Irish kingdoms fell under the axe. Paris itself would one day be besieged. The long ship became a symbol of terror, part myth, part metal. And here's the genius. Vikings weren't trying to conquer Europe. Not yet. They were crippling it. Hit and run, loot and vanish. Their strategy was asymmetrical warfare centuries before anyone had a name for it. This was Viking lightning. A monastery here, a village there, always unpredictable, always brutal. European lords tried to defend their coasts, but the raiders just changed course. A river blocked? They found another. A castle built? They bypassed it. No wall could stop waterborne ghosts. For players of Age of Empires 2, this strategy feels familiar. The Viking civilization in the game is a nightmare to fight on water maps. Their unique longboats dominate the seas. Their economy accelerates early. Their units strike before you can blink. It mirrors history. In-game, a player using Vikings might rush water control, deny resources, harass villagers, and disappear. It's not about sustained battles. It's about death by 1,000 cuts. Just like Lindisfarne, just like Paris, just like the countless river towns lost to the tide. The longship isn't just a unit, it's a statement. You'll never see us coming. As years passed, the Viking mission evolved. The same ships that brought death also brought trade. And people. Norse settlers established towns in Ireland. One of them would grow into Dublin. They navigated the rivers of France, Russia, and even reached Constantinople. But in 793, and the decades that followed, they weren't settlers yet. They were a shadow on the water. To the frightened priests of Christendom, they were not men. They were monsters. Creatures of fury and flame who laughed at crosses and killed with joy. The term Viking became synonymous with chaos. Not a people, but a nightmare. And that nightmare spread. For a frightened village, a Viking raid meant more than lost gold. It meant lost sons, burned crops, sacred texts soaked in blood. There were no negotiations, no mercy. If you were lucky, they only took your silver. If you were unlucky, they took your daughter or your life. This was psychological warfare centuries before it had a name. Every monastery built inland, every town wall reinforced, every king who lost sleep at night. They were all reactions to the terror first kindled at Lindisfarne. It changed Europe. By the end of the 9th century, what had started as scattered raids became a continental storm. Viking leaders became kings. Settlements became strongholds. Raids became invasions. But that's a story for another chapter. What matters now is this. The Longships were not just vessels of wood and iron. They were vessels of change. Through their sails blew the winds of a new era, one forged in fear, fire, and fury. And it all began with the quiet prayer of monks and the scream that followed. What if history wasn't just remembered, but played? What if the brutal force of Viking raids, the clash of axes, the roar of longboats, could be felt not in textbooks, but at your fingertips? For millions of gamers around the globe, the Vikings aren't introduced through a museum exhibit or a dusty history lecture. They're met on the battlefield through the booming soundtrack of Age of Empires II, a strategy game where civilizations clash and history comes to life in pixels and war cries. And in this digital arena, the Vikings aren't just survivors of the North, they're masters of war. From the very first click, Age of Empires II doesn't portray the Vikings as just another medieval faction. It turns them into a strategic symbol, a masterclass in early aggression, water dominance, and berserker fury. Through clever design, historical reverence, and game balance, it captures the soul of the Viking Age and hands it to you like a sharpened axe. I am the storm. A Viking proverb brought to life in every match. Let's start with what defines the Viking civilization in-game. Two brutal advantages: naval supremacy and infantry power. In the world of Age of Empires II, no other civilization makes you feel like you're launching a real raid across the English coast, quite like the Vikings. First, the longboat, their unique naval unit, is more than just a ship. It's a weaponized tribute to the iconic longships that once carried Norsemen through rivers, seas, and enemy defenses. In AoE 2, longboats fire multiple arrows at high speed, slicing through enemy fleets with terrifying efficiency. They don't just float, they dominate. This isn't just game design, it's historical translation. Longboats were the Viking superweapon of the 9th century, allowing them to strike anywhere, anytime. Their shallow drafts let them sail upriver and raid deep inland. AoE 2 gives you that same terrifying flexibility. Spawn a few longboats early, and you've essentially taken control of the water, cutting off your opponent's trade, fishing, and escape. But what happens when you bring the battle onto land? That's when the Berserker charges in. The Viking unique unit is one of the most mythologized. The Berserker, a mad warrior who can heal itself during battle. In gameplay terms, that sounds insane. In storytelling terms, it's perfect. These units aren't just strong, they're relentless. They don't retreat, they regenerate and return. Historically, Berserkers were feared not only for their brutality, but for what they represented. Warriors who abandoned all fear, fought in a trance-like fury, and shattered enemy morale. AoE 2 leans into that mythology and lets the player unleash that chaos. A pack of Berserkers can turn a skirmish into a slaughter. And here's the magic. The game doesn't give Vikings heavy cavalry or fancy fortifications. Instead, it challenges players to channel their aggression, much like the historical Norse. Your power lies in speed, ferocity, and hitting first. The game rewards those who fight like a Viking would, without hesitation. When you select the Vikings in AoE 2, you're not playing defense. You're setting the pace of the war. That's because the Vikings also enjoy a powerful economic edge early on. Their infantry upgrades are free, yes, free, and their fishing ships are faster and tougher. For a skilled player, this means one thing. You can boom fast without needing a booming economy. And that's not just a mechanic, it's a mirror of Viking society. The Norse didn't build great cities or castles. They thrived on mobility, resilience, and using natural resources. forests, rivers, and the sea to their advantage. In AoE 2, players quickly learn to send villagers to the shore, start fishing, gather wood, and scale quickly into an army that can overwhelm their opponents before they even realize the threat is coming. The most popular Viking tactics in-game reflect this beautifully. Fast castle into Berserkers, rushing to the castle age to mass-produce healing infantry. Water rush, aka longboat boom, creating early naval dominance and strangling your enemy's food supply. Infantry swarm, flooding the map with free upgraded swordsmen, outpacing civilizations that rely on costlier units. It's not just strategy, it's storytelling through gameplay. Every AoE 2 match is a tiny tale. And when you play Vikings, that story often begins with a cold, quiet start. Villagers chopping trees, building docks, casting nets. But it escalates fast. The moment those longboats arrive or the Berserkers land ashore, you feel it. The rhythm of conquest. Your enemy? They're not just fighting a strategy. They're fighting an idea, an ideology built into the Viking civilization. Hit hard, hit early, leave no chance for recovery. Even the sound design helps. The Viking unit voices are deep, guttural. The clash of longboats echoes across the water. And when you watch a horde of berserkers charging into a town, regenerating as they fight, it feels less like a game and more like a cinematic invasion. To make Vikings work as a game civilization, AoE 2 had to streamline history. You won't find the complex role of Viking women, who in real life could inherit property, lead farms, and even fight in some sagas. Nor will you see much of Norse mythology. No Odin, no runes, no spiritual rituals before battle. Instead, the game creates a generalized European religion system. It doesn't fully dive into Viking culture outside of combat. And that's okay, because the core essence survives. AoE 2 chose to represent Vikings not by what they believed, but by how they fought. And in that, it succeeds brilliantly. It's a distillation of historical truth into strategic experience. The simplification allows players from any background to understand the Viking archetype. Water warriors, frenzied fighters, early game masters, economic raiders. That's not everything about Vikings, but it's enough to make them iconic. Even 2 decades after AoE 2's release, Viking remains one of the most played civilizations in ranked matches. Streamers, speedrunners, and casual players alike flock to them, not just for their power, but for how fun they are to play. And it's no coincidence that when Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition launched, the Viking civilization needed almost no changes. Their identity was already strong, their design timeless. You don't need flashy gunpowder or castles to feel legendary. You just need a longboat and a war cry. Age of Empires 2 didn't just give the Vikings a seat at the digital table. It gave them a throne on the high seas. It told their story not through cutscenes, but through choices, through strategies, through the thrill of watching your fleet sweep across the waves while berserkers crush the enemy's front lines. In that moment, you're not just playing history, you're rewriting it. And when the battlefield goes quiet and your enemies lie broken, it's not just victory you feel, it's legacy. When the game ends, the legend begins. After clashing with berserkers in the virtual world of Age of Empires 2, millions of players shut off their computers and turned to their screens again, not for war, but for story. In recent years, television has become the new battlefield where Viking myths are reborn. From blood-soaked raids to fragile romances, shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom have rekindled global fascination with these fierce seafarers. But beneath the drama and the spectacle lies a question we rarely ask. How much truth survives the translation from saga to screen? Let's start with the most iconic of them all. Ragnar Lothbrok, warrior, farmer, legend in Vikings. Ragnar Lothbrok is not just a man. He's a myth made flesh. A farmer with the eyes of a dreamer and the heart of a conqueror. He dares to sail west when everyone else calls it madness. His journey, equal parts ambition and bloodshed, mirrors the Viking spirit. Fearless, bold, and deeply human. But here's the catch. Ragnar, as we know him on screen, never truly existed. He's a composite of multiple sagas, perhaps inspired by real warriors, perhaps not. What the show does brilliantly is turn these fragmented legends into a coherent, gripping story. Ragnar is portrayed as a man torn between tradition and change, gods and kings, family and glory. His rise is Shakespearean, his fall almost biblical. The slow-motion raids, the whispered prayers before battle, the political betrayal, all are framed not just as history, but as myth in motion. And that's the magic. Vikings is not a documentary. It's a modern saga, emotionally authentic, if not always historically accurate. Uhtred of Bebbanburg. Between two worlds. If Vikings is raw myth, then The Last Kingdom is gritty realism. The show follows Uhtred, a Saxon noble raised by Danes, as he straddles the line between two warring cultures, the Christian Saxons and the pagan Vikings. He's fictional, but his world isn't. What makes The Last Kingdom so compelling is how closely it ties personal storylines to actual history. Figures like King Alfred the Great walk alongside Uhtred, and major battles, like the defense of Wessex, are depicted with surprising attention to historical detail. The show doesn't glorify war. It shows its cost. It doesn't paint the Vikings as monsters or saints, but as people, flawed, complex, and painfully human. Unlike Vikings, which thrives on grand gestures, The Last Kingdom excels in nuance. The blood is still there. The betrayals are still there. But so are the quiet moments, the family dinners, the whispered regrets, the moral dilemmas that define leadership. This is not myth-making. This is history dramatized. The Shield Maidens, truth or fantasy? One of the most enduring and popular images from modern Viking media is the female warrior, the Shield Maiden. Lagertha, Ragnar's first wife in Vikings, stands as a cultural icon. Fearless in battle, sharp in politics, unbreakable in spirit. With her braided hair, leather armor, and razor-sharp sword, she's everything modern audiences crave in a warrior heroine. But was she real? The answer: it's complicated. Yes, Norse sagas mention shield maidens. And yes, a few graves unearthed in Sweden and Denmark have sparked debate over whether some women were buried as warriors. But widespread female participation in Viking combat? That's still hotly contested. Most historians agree Viking women held considerable power, just not usually on the battlefield. They managed households, inherited property, divorced their husbands, and kept communities running while the men were away. In many ways, they were the true backbone of Viking society. Shows like Vikings give them swords to match their strength. But the reality was no less impressive, just more domestic. The screen elevates their role to mythic proportions. It's not historically accurate, but it's culturally resonant. The romance of war, choreographed chaos television, has a knack for making war look beautiful. The infamous shield wall, a brutal Viking tactic where warriors locked shields to form a moving fortress, becomes a rhythmic, almost poetic dance of death on screen. The camera doesn't flinch from the violence, but it stylizes it. Slow motion, dramatic music, a heroic one-liner before the final blow. But the truth of Viking raids was anything but romantic. These were terrifying acts of violence, often targeting unarmed monks and civilians. Villages were burned, people were enslaved, wealth was looted. Yet most modern shows flip the perspective. We root for the raiders, not the raided. We see the Viking side of the story, the desperation, the ambition, the need to claim a place in a hostile world. And that shift matters. It humanizes what history once condemned. It forces us to ask, what drives a people to violence? Greed, faith, survival? This isn't just spectacle, it's selective empathy. Modern mythology, a double-edged sword TV and film have done what no textbook could. They've made the Viking Age feel real again. Ragnar and Uhtred, Lagertha and Alfred, they're now household names, not footnotes in dusty tomes. Through the power of streaming and storytelling, Viking lore has reached millions who might never pick up a history book. But this reach comes at a cost. Facts are bent, timelines are compressed, real people are turned into archetypes, heroes, villains, lovers, savages. And in doing so, we risk confusing entertainment with evidence. Yet perhaps that's not the point. Maybe these shows were never meant to teach history, but to spark curiosity about it. Maybe the greatest success of Vikings and the Last Kingdom is not their accuracy, but their ability to make us care. To Google ancient names, to visit museums, to imagine what it meant to live, fight, and love in a time when the world was still being carved by sword and sail. They don't tell us the full truth, but they lead us to look for it. Where legend meets legacy. In the end, what we see on screen is neither total fiction nor full fact. It's something in between, a cinematic reflection of our fascination with a time that feels both alien and familiar. The Viking legacy isn't just about raids and runes. It's about the enduring human stories that survived the centuries, the ambition to explore, the hunger for identity, the battle between belief systems. Ragnar embodies the dreamer. Uhtred captures the outcast. Lagertha reminds us that strength isn't bound by gender. Through them, we see not just the past, but ourselves. And maybe that's the point of these modern Viking sagas. Not to tell us who the Vikings were, but to ask who we are and why their story still grips us more than 1,000 years later. Chapter 6. Was there ever a Viking empire? They came like ghosts in the mist. No flags, no warning, just the shriek of iron against wood and the thundering fear that followed. But after the smoke cleared, after the monasteries were pillaged and the villages burned, the world began to notice something strange. The Vikings didn't always leave. Sometimes they stayed. The myth of chaos versus the truth of construction. Hollywood loves to freeze the Vikings in time, as if they were doomed to wander forever, blood-soaked and screaming into battle. Games like Age of Empires 2 capture their ferocity with berserkers and longboats. But what if the real story is more complex? What if the Vikings weren't just destroyers, but builders of something much larger? Not an empire with golden crowns and palatial halls, but a different kind of empire. One stitched across oceans, rivers, and cultures. A web, not a throne. Let's set the record straight first. Let's crush the romantic fantasy. There was no singular Viking empire. No high king of all Norsemen, no shining capital in the north. Instead, imagine a sprawling network. Decentralized, flexible, and utterly unpredictable. Like spider silk cast across a continent. From Greenland to Constantinople, from Dublin to Baghdad. This wasn't a kingdom. It was a presence, a shadow, and it spread not just with swords, but with ships, trade, and stories. The Danelaw, England's Viking frontier, start with England. By the mid-800s, Viking raids had evolved into something more strategic. They no longer hit and ran, they hit and held. They carved out a massive region in northeastern England called the Danelaw, a place where Danish laws were followed. Norse gods were worshipped, at least for a time. And cities like Jorvik, modern-day York, became power hubs. In Age of Empires 2, we talk about map control, owning key positions for resources and dominance. That's exactly what the Vikings did. They didn't just burn down churches, they turned cities into Norse strongholds, places of law, trade, and settlement. They played the long game. From raiders to rulers, Normandy now heads south. France. In a political masterstroke, the Frankish king offered land to a Viking chieftain named Rollo in exchange for protection against other raiders. The Vikings didn't just accept, they transformed. The region became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. There, the Norse adapted with incredible speed. They converted to Christianity, adopted the French tongue, married local nobility. And their descendants? Well, one of them would become William the Conqueror, the man who would cross the English Channel and take England in 1066. The grandson of a Viking became King of England. That's not just conquest, that's legacy. Ireland and the birth of Dublin. Let's hop across the sea to Ireland. The first Norse arrivals in Ireland were brutal. Lightning-fast raids, stolen gold, burned abbeys. But eventually, they started staying. They built outposts along rivers, safe places for ships, trade, and restocking. One of these grew into a town, and then into a city. We know it today as Dublin. The Vikings turned it into a vital hub for the slave trade and silver economy, connecting the Irish Sea to the wider Norse world. The city would change hands many times, but its Norse DNA is undeniable. Again, this wasn't just destruction. It was construction. It was civilization by the Longship. The Eastern Dream, from Sweden to the steppes. If you thought the Vikings only moved west, think again. The Swedish Vikings, often called the Varangians, pushed east. Along the great rivers of what's now Russia and Ukraine, they established trade posts, fortresses, and towns. Names like Novgorod and Kiev weren't just Slavic, and they were shaped by Norse hands. This is where they connected with the Islamic world, bringing back silver dirhams and exotic luxuries. They linked the Baltic to the Black Sea, and eventually even reached the Byzantine Empire. Some Vikings became elite bodyguards to the Byzantine emperor, known as the Varangian Guard. Imagine that. A Viking standing beneath the marble domes of Constantinople, sword in hand, sworn to defend an emperor of the East. It wasn't an empire in the traditional sense, but it felt like one. A brotherhood of traders and warriors spanning continents. Vikings in the sandbox of empire. If you're a gamer, you get this. You start with a few villagers and a scout. You expand. You don't just fight. You build, explore, trade. You find relics. You secure gold mines. You adapt your strategy. That's what the Vikings did. Their longships were scouts. Their settlements were outposts. Their trade routes were lifelines. They understood something that many rulers forgot. Power doesn't come just from conquest. It comes from connection. A sea-bound empire. So let's ask again. Did the Vikings build an empire? Not by Roman standards, not by Mongol standards, but by their own? Absolutely. Their empire was liquid, not stone. It flowed with the tide. It rose with the sails. It stretched from Vinland in North America to the gates of Baghdad. And while it never flew a single banner, it changed the world it touched. They left behind languages, place names, genetic footprints. York, Normandy, Dublin, Kiev. These weren't Viking colonies. They were Viking chapters in the story of Europe. Tied to the empire without a crown. In the end, the Vikings didn't need a throne or a crown. Their empire didn't need borders. It had horizons. And like the sea they ruled, it was wild, shifting, and hard to contain. But it was real. So the next time you load into Age of Empires 2, and you choose the Viking civilization, remember, you're not just raiding. You're writing history, one longship at a time. They came with axes, but they stayed with ambition. They didn't conquer the world, but they connected it. And in doing so, the Vikings built something far more enduring than an empire of gold. They built a legacy. Chapter 7. The end of an era and a lasting legacy. Every storm runs out of rain, even the Vikings. For nearly 3 centuries, the Northmen had carved their name into the bones of Europe, in fire, in steel, in legend. But by the close of the 11th century, the longships that once struck terror across coasts and rivers were docking for the final time. The Viking Age didn't end with a climactic battle or dramatic fall. It faded slowly, inevitably, not with a scream, but a silence. So what happened to the fiercest warriors of medieval Europe? The short answer, they changed. The long answer, they were changed by faith, by power, and by time itself. In the early days, Viking raids had a common theme: monasteries, churches, crosses smashed under pagan boots. It was a culture clash written in blood. But by the 10th and 11th centuries, something unexpected happened. The sons of Odin began kneeling before Christ. Christianization swept across Scandinavia, not as a gentle tide, but as a series of violent waves. Kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Saint Olaf of Norway didn't ask politely. They enforced conversion with the sword. Villages were burned for resisting. Pagan temples were destroyed. Those who once called on Thor were baptized by fire and fear. But behind the brutality was a deeper truth. Christianity offered power. Aligning with the Christian kingdoms of Europe meant recognition, legitimacy, and trade. A Christian king could write treaties, marry into foreign dynasties, and be accepted on the political stage. Slowly, the old gods were pushed into shadows. Valhalla, with its feasting and fighting, gave way to the promise of heaven and the fear of hell. And just like that, the spiritual backbone of the Viking world began to splinter. Another transformation came from within: centralization. The early Viking Age was ruled by local chieftains, fiercely independent men commanding small bands of warriors. But as wealth flowed in and territory expanded, the need for structure grew. By the 11th century, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were no longer just names. They were nations. Kings emerged, not warlords, but monarchs with armies, navies, and tax systems. And those kings didn't want chaotic raids destabilizing their rule. They needed control, order, a professional army instead of plundering bands. Suddenly, being a lone raider wasn't heroic. It was criminal. Raids on Christian lands became politically toxic. Internal wars were replaced by territorial defense. Vikings, once feared as pirates, became soldiers and traders. The same longships that once brought fire now carried goods, envoys, and missionaries. The dragon-headed ships had lost their teeth, but gained purpose. But the Vikings didn't just disappear. Their fingerprints are everywhere, especially in places they once ruled. Take England, for example. In the regions once called the Danelaw, the Viking impact is still felt. Dozens of English words trace back to Old Norse: sky, egg, window, husband, knife. Even the word law itself is Norse in origin. Their legal traditions, particularly the Thing, a proto-parliament where free men debated and judged, inspired early forms of democratic governance. In Iceland, this system endured for centuries and remains a foundational part of their history. Viking DNA didn't just pass through bloodlines, it passed through culture, language, and institutions. Even after the swords were buried and the shrines torn down, the gods remained. Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki may have lost their worshippers, but not their stories. Through the Poetic Edda, Snorri Sturluson, and the oral sagas, their legends endured. Unlike other mythologies buried by time, Norse myths found new life, not just in scholarly texts, but in comic books, movies, video games, and novels. Today, Thor's hammer smashes box office records. Loki is more meme than menace. Odin's wisdom inspires modern-day philosophers and fantasy writers alike. The old gods have been rebranded, but their essence survives, still wild, still mysterious, still Viking. In the end, the Viking Age didn't die. It evolved. The Berserker became a knight. The raider became a merchant. The explorer became a king. And yet, something about the Viking spirit remains untamed. Maybe it's in the way they chase the unknown, daring to cross oceans with nothing but oars and stars. Maybe it's in their refusal to accept borders, kings, or fate. Or maybe it's in us, in our obsession with them, our endless fascination with their myths, battles, and bravery. The Viking Age may have ended 1,000 years ago, but its echo still rides the wind. And perhaps, somewhere out there, the gods still whisper across the North Sea. Chapter 8. Separating Fact from Fiction. The game, the film, or the history. We've sailed the stormy seas with the early raiders. We've worked the soil alongside stoic Scandinavian farmers. We've watched their legends flicker across our screens in fire-lit halls and blood-soaked battlefields. Now, as we reach the end of this journey, it's time to tie it all together. The story of the Vikings is not one clean-cut tale. It's a tangled braid of truths, myths, and interpretations, woven from three powerful sources: history, games, and modern film and television. Each offers a unique lens, sometimes sharpening the details, other times distorting them. But to truly understand the Viking Age, we must learn to see through the layers and appreciate the depth behind the image. History gives us the raw core, the bones of reality. It's built from archaeological digs, weathered sagas, and the foreign accounts of those who faced the Northmen in battle or trade. Through this lens, the Vikings emerge as a people of striking contradictions. They were warriors, yes, but also farmers and craftsmen. They were merchants with sharp minds and hands stained in soil or blood. Their beliefs were deep, shaped by gods and fate, and their society, while stratified, allowed surprising freedoms, even a primitive sense of democracy. This truth, however, is rarely glamorous. It lacks the thunder of charging horses or the fiery speeches before battle. It's subtle, complex, and often overlooked. Then comes the world of video games, specifically Age of Empires II. Here, history transforms into strategy. The Vikings are distilled into their core essence, a civilization of maritime power, relentless infantry, and resource mastery. The infamous Berserker, in history a rare and perhaps drug-fueled frenzy fighter, becomes a powerful self-healing unit on the battlefield. Unstoppable, mythical, almost supernatural. the Longship, a triumph of naval engineering with its shallow draft and unmatched speed, becomes the longboat, a deadly war machine that rules the seas. Even the game's emphasis on woodcutting and fishing reflects the resource-driven lifestyle of Norse society. It's not historical fact, but symbolic truth, a playable myth, a what-if scenario where you command the Viking spirit with your mouse and keyboard. And then there's Hollywood. Film and television take a different route. They spin the Vikings into legends. They don't just tell us what happened, they tell us how it felt. They introduce us to Ragnar Lothbrok, a character who is more myth than man. A fusion of multiple sagas into one charismatic, tortured hero. Shows like Vikings give us shield maidens like Lagertha, fierce and noble, representing a modern reimagining of women's roles in Norse culture. In truth, women did wield property rights, ran farms, and even participated in legal proceedings. But rarely, if ever, did they charge into shield walls with axe in hand. Yet, these stories resonate today, giving voice to what might have been, and connecting the Viking Age with contemporary themes of power, identity, and legacy. The brutal raids, terrorizing to European monks and kings, are framed in these stories as epic quests for glory. Gods walk among men. Fate guides every blade. It's not classroom history, it's high drama. And while it may stretch the truth, it preserves the emotion, the chaos, the scale. So how do we navigate this maze of perspectives? The answer is not to choose one over the other. Instead, we must see them as layers of a larger saga. Each version, history, game, and film, captures something essential. The historian offers us reality, the game, the strategic spirit, and the storyteller, the soul. Take the Berserkers. Historically rare, perhaps hallucinating warriors, feared and unpredictable. In the game, they become elite units, unrelenting and self-healing, a nod to their legendary stamina. On screen, they transform into near-mythical beings, snarling with rage and bloodlust, the embodiment of Viking terror. Or consider women in Viking society. In history, they had rights and responsibilities, but their role was mostly grounded in daily life. In games, they are largely invisible, but in television, they stand tall and proud, warriors, queens, visionaries. Not entirely accurate, but powerfully symbolic. Even the mighty Longships evolved through these mediums. In history, they were masterpieces of design, shallow draft vessels that made river raids possible deep into Europe. In Age of Empires 2, they become warships of unmatched speed and firepower. In film, they are the sweeping icons of Viking identity, cinematic and majestic, slicing through fog and flame. Religion, too, takes many forms. Historically, the Norse pantheon was vast and complex, with rituals and gods that reflected the harshness and wonder of life. In the game, belief is simplified, barely touched. But in film and television, it pulses at the heart of every choice. Visions from Odin, sacrifices to the gods, and fate woven by the Norns. Here, belief becomes drama, tension, and prophecy. And what of the Vikings' purpose? Historically, they were raiders, traders, explorers, and settlers. In games, their purpose is conquest, resource control, and strategic domination. On screen, they seek something deeper: glory, legacy, and the meaning of fate. In the end, the Vikings are more than any one version. They are the terror on the shore, the strategist in your command center, the hero with fire in his eyes and gods in his dreams. And perhaps that's the beauty of it all. The Viking Age lives on not because it is fixed in stone, but because it moves with us, changing with each story, each screen, each battlefield. The raider, the thinker, the dreamer. They are all part of the same saga. And now the question remains: who is your Viking? The brutal raider? The cunning strategist? Or the fearless explorer chasing the edge of the map? Maybe, just maybe. You are all three, and that is the legacy that still echoes through time.
They came from the cold, crashing through Europe like a storm on the sea. That's how we first met the Vikings, in tales of fire, blood, and longships slicing through fog at dawn. But as we've discovered, the real story runs far deeper than the myth. The Vikings weren't just warriors, they were farmers, craftsmen, poets, and pioneers. Yes, they raided, but they also built. They traveled not only to conquer, but to trade, to settle, to explore. From Iceland to Baghdad, from Newfoundland to Kiev, they wove themselves into the fabric of a changing world. What makes their legacy so enduring? It's not just the swords or the sagas, it's the spirit. A spirit that dared to sail past the edge of the known world. A people who weren't afraid of chaos, who embraced uncertainty, who carved order from ice and war. The Viking Age may have ended centuries ago, but their echoes still shape us today. In pop culture, they've become immortal. Games like Age of Empires 2 let us play as Viking warlords, commanding berserkers and longboats in digital battlefields. Shows like Vikings or The Last Kingdom have reimagined their world. Gritty, beautiful, brutal, reminding us that behind every shield wall stood human hearts full of ambition, faith, and fear. But here's the thing. Entertainment simplifies. It compresses centuries into episodes. It turns people into legends. And while that keeps the story alive, it can blur the truth. That's why understanding history matters. So we can enjoy the myth but never forget the humanity beneath the helmet. In the end, the Viking legacy isn't about violence or glory. It's about transformation, about how a scattered group of seafaring tribes shaped empires, redefined borders, and left behind something greater than kingdoms. An idea. The idea that you can rise from nothing. That survival takes more than strength. It takes cunning, courage, and change. That even in an age of fire and fury, you can leave behind a future. So when we hear the clash of axes in a video game, or watch Ragnar face fate on a burning hill, we're not just reliving history. We're touching something timeless. Because the Vikings didn't just raid the past, they helped write the future. And their story, like the sea they once ruled, will never truly be still. If this journey through Viking history stirred something in you, a sense of wonder, a thirst to know more, or just the thrill of discovering what lies beneath the myth, then don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to let the algorithm know these stories matter. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next forgotten empire, lost civilization, or untold legend. And share this video with a friend who still thinks Vikings were just horned helmet raiders. But more than that, drop a comment. Tell us, what part of the Viking legacy shocked you most? Which mystery should we uncover next? Let's decode history together. One story at a time. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the past is never truly gone, it just waits for someone to ask the right question.